Good morning and welcome to the new edition of my live comments. Iran has witnessed various revolutions and disturbances. The Shah of Iran was thrown out by a violent revolution. Then we saw protests, popular protests at different times. The last one in 2009 did not receive much attention worldwide because President Obama did not want to annoy Iran. And now once again, Iran is being wrecked by the riots, by the protests. Hundreds of thousands of Iranians are protesting across the country. Former President Ahmadinejad has been arrested. More than 25 people have been killed. Hundreds have been arrested. And Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, is supposed to protect the revolution and its achievement and is the worst force to deal with the people. As a matter of fact, this organization is a fountainhead of violation of all human rights, which was reported by United Nations Special Rapporteur. The cries that we hear are, we will die to get back our Iran. We don't want an Islamic Republic. The clerics and the imams act like gods. Death or freedom. Death to Khomeini. Death to Rouhani. Leave Syria. Think about us. Not Gaza. Not Lebanon. My life for Iran. In other words, the protests are against the government's corruption, foreign adventurism, including Tehran's support to Assad, and controlling of Lebanon through Hezbollah. And then there has been a curious response world over. USA has been very vocal in condemning the repressive policies of the president and the Revolutionary Guard of Iran. But Canada, by turn, has been absolutely struck dumb. As a matter of fact, it's deaf and mute as well, apart from being dumb. I have seen and observed over the last few years that the Prime Minister and his government have been struggling to carve out a consistent position on the Islamic Republic of Iran. On the one hand, liberals have very correctly followed the footsteps of Prime Minister Harper in sponsoring an annual resolution at the United Nations condemning Iran for human rights records and violations. This tradition began long back when an Iranian Canadian journalist, Zahra Khazemi, was arrested, tortured, raped, and killed in 2003. That is one side of the picture which is quite commendable. Any government should protect its citizens, and what Canada was doing was protesting against the shameless murder of one of its citizens who were not doing anything wrong. On the other side, Ottawa has been aggressively pursuing re-engagement with Iran, largely aiming at creating financial opportunities for the Canadian companies, not a bad deal, but then doing business in Iran inevitably means that you are enriching those government entities which create those violations of human rights about which you protest. Now, this is a very contradictory situation. And maybe that is the reason that has made the government deaf, mute, silent, unable to take any step. And we see the contradiction which is becoming more consistent, and it can very well tell when Canada tries to secure Security Council seat, because the opponents would say that Canada was quiet when hundreds and thousands were being arrested, killed, beaten, tortured. It refused to be the voice of the conscience of humanity. I don't want to delve into the negatives of this policy, but I definitely want to show a certain action plan which government ought to follow. Unfortunately, government is struck by an attack of inertia, maybe paralysis, but it has to come out. In case it wants to be sure of its credentials as the conscience of the world, as far as the human rights are concerned, it has to be open, it has to be clear, it has to be vocal. So some of the steps which are required are very clear. Bill S-219 must be supported. This would mean elimination of all current Canadian sanctions regarding the Iranian government, and there are few remaining only because the government has lifted most of the sanctions in 2015. As soon as Trudeau government came to power, the first thing they did was lifted the sanctions, majority of the sanctions, but still some are there. So tie those sanctions which are existing to the requirement that the present regime stops its activities which are repressive, which are inhuman, and which violate the conscience of the world. It should also stop an incitement, government's incitement, to the hatred of the minority groups which the present government is indulging into. And more important, and in the context of the demonstrations and the protests that are rocking Iran, put a halt to the vast system of the domestic repression. Only when and only in that case improvement is seen in these areas should these sanctions be seized or lifted. And let's not forget, mostly sanctions have been useless. But in the case of Iran, these sanctions were essentially helpful. This is similar to the approach taken by the USA in reaching an arms control agreement with Soviet Union in 1975, which linked security, economic, and human rights issues. So that's the first thing which should be done. And let me tell you, this would have a very, very limited effect. But to start with, that is important. Then the second part is to invoke the Justice for the Victims of the Corrupt Official Foreign Act. This act was passed very recently, and it's normally known as Magnitsky Act. The relevant members of the Iranian regime who are guilty of human rights abuses and corruption in and the leadership of Iranian Revolutionary Guards should be acted upon under this act. Now, this act would mean, the application of this act would mean immediately that all those people's assets outside Iran are subject to confiscation. And that's important because there are huge assets in North America of Iran. And if we confiscate it, you can be sure they'll come to their senses. As a matter of fact, this legislation is highly appropriate to confront Iran's violent suppression of protests, criminalization of political dissent, execution of minors and homosexuals, Homosexuals are being killed every day in Iran. You know that. Imprisonment of journalists, bloggers, and human rights defenders, and stoning of women and persecution of ethnic and religious minorities. Now, those are the major issues which can be invoked under this act, justice for the victims of the corrupt foreign officials. You don't have to deal with them there in Iran. You have to deal with them here because they have invested here. And it's easy for CRA, RCMP, and CSIS to take effective action in that regard. It's within the internal parameters and it's perfectly legal. The third, extremely important is, recently, Bombardier Aircraft has entered into an agreement for selling aircraft worth 100 millions to Iran. And out of those 100 millions, 80% of the financing is being done by the government of Canada, the federal government. That means $80 million are being spent by the government of Canada to empower Iranian Air Force. There has been no public scrutiny from the Iranian media sources, and whatever scrutiny has been done by a few investigative sources. As far as Iran's aviation sector is concerned, we know that the suppression of human rights and sponsorship of terrorism, which is much more important, is primarily helped by the strong air force that Iran has. So if you stop this $100 million of sale of aircrafts, which will significantly augment Iranian Air Force, you will be striking at the root of the terrorism. And shockingly, since the federal government is funding 80%, by implication, federal government is guilty of aiding, abetting, and helping Iran in furthering attacks on the people's freedom and supporting terrorism. You know that Iranian aircraft, civilian aircraft, was used to help Assad and Hezbollah, and has been doing so since 2011. More so since 2013, when Iran and Russia collaborated to help Syria and Aleppo. Hundreds of flights being run by the commercial airline of France using commercial civilian aircraft help Hezbollah in Lebanon and Assad in Syria. And at least Assad one can understand, but Hezbollah is the fountainhead of terrorism. So that would be stopped. Canadian interested in preventing Iran from continuing its unlawful activities would be doing a human service. This is a type of dilemma Iranian government wants Ottawa to face, and Ottawa is so shocked that it cannot even blink. And that is the shocking aspect. Thirdly, the Canadian parliamentarians should stop simply being automatons, robots who raise their arms whenever Trudeau says a thing. Let them publicly support the Iranian dissidents. Until and unless you do that, nothing would happen. This is a critical moment for the Iranian people. Is their life, is their liberty, is their soul which is at stake. It's also a critical moment for Canada. For all the bragging that it does for the Canadian values and the human rights. Can it dare come out openly and support the dissidents? The people in Iran have shown their distaste for the government. It's acknowledged all over the free world. Why is Canada feeling shy in stating an obvious fact that this regime has got to go. Why is Canada not taking up steps which I have enunciated above? So while it's a critical moment for Iran, it's an equally critical moment for Canada. Bad acts happen not because those people are doing something wrong, but because people who say that they are good keep their mouths shut. If you are really honest, then it's a time to act and take a positive step. And if you can't take that positive, say it openly that you support the regime in Iran. You simply cannot run with the hounds and hunt the hare. Either you are with the hare and you are running away from them, or you are with the hound and hunting the hare. But Canada, by sitting on the fence, is proving its moral dilemma and its non-commitment to the ideal that it professes. Let's hope it wakes up to its responsibilities and its moral obligations. If not to the Iranian people, for its own soul, for its own statements. Thank you.